The morning of Carter Ellison's engagement party smelled like fresh roses and expensive champagne, and he hated both. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 42nd floor, looking down at Chicago's skyline as the city moved beneath him like something indifferent to his life. In 6 hours, he would walk into the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, slip a $200,000 ring onto Vivian Hartley's finger, and smile for photographs that would appear in every major financial magazine by morning. It was a good match. Everyone said so. His board of directors said so. His lawyers said so. His late father's ghost, he imagined, would say so too. Carter Ellison was 38 years old, the founder and CEO of Ellison Capital Group, a private equity firm with a portfolio worth just under $4 billion. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with grey eyes that his assistant once described as the colour of a storm that hasn't decided what it wants to do yet. He ran 3 miles every morning, drank black coffee, and had not taken a vacation in 4 years. He was, by every measurable standard, successful. And yet, standing at that window, he felt the particular hollowness that only comes to men who have everything and feel nothing about it. His phone buzzed. His assistant, Diane. "Car is ready downstairs, Mr. Ellison. Also, the florist confirmed the arrangements for the ballroom. 300 white orchids as requested by Ms. Hartley." "Thank you, Diane." He set the phone down without reading the rest. He reached for his jacket, charcoal grey, Italian cut, and checked himself in the mirror. Everything in place. He looked exactly like a man who was about to get engaged. He practiced the smile once, briefly, then stopped when he realized it didn't reach his eyes. The drive from his penthouse to the hotel should have taken 20 minutes. Carter was in the back seat of his black Escalade, the partition raised, a glass of water untouched beside him, when his driver, Marcus, slowed unexpectedly near the corner of Wacker and Michigan. "Mr. Ellison, I'm sorry. There's some kind of commotion on the sidewalk. Give me a second to get around it." Carter glanced out the tinted window out of nothing more than habit, and then he stopped breathing. On the sidewalk, near a small food cart that sold hot dogs and pretzels, stood 4 boys. They couldn't have been older than 9 or 10, all of them clustered together around the cart vendor, who appeared to be gesturing with some agitation. The boys looked disheveled, worn sneakers, mismatched clothes, backpacks that had seen too many seasons. They were clearly together, moving with the unconscious unity of children who had learned to navigate the world as a group. But that wasn't why Carter had stopped breathing. The boys all had dark hair, strong jawlines, a certain cast to their brows, serious, slightly furrowed, like they were always calculating something. One of them turned toward the window as if sensing the car, and Carter felt the air leave his lungs completely. The boy looked exactly like him, not vaguely, not in the passing, coincidental way that strangers sometimes resemble each other. The resemblance was precise, the shape of the jaw, the straight nose, the wide-set eyes. If Carter had seen a photograph of himself at that age, this was what he would have looked at. He sat motionless for 3 full seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than Carter Ellison usually spent motionless about anything. "Stop the car," he said. "Sir, Marcus, stop the car." The Escalade pulled to the curb. Carter was out before Marcus could reach the door handle. He crossed the sidewalk without entirely deciding to do it, the way a man moves towards something that his body understands before his mind catches up. Up close, the resemblance to all 4 boys was staggering. They ranged in height slightly, suggesting small differences in age, maybe a year or 2 between each of them. One was taller, with a more guarded expression. One had a small scar above his left eyebrow. One was quietly eating what appeared to be a stolen pretzel. The vendor was still complaining to the tallest boy in an exasperated tone. The 4th, the smallest, stood slightly behind the others and watched Carter approach with enormous, wary eyes. Those eyes, grey, storm-colored. "Hey," Carter heard himself speak before he had formulated what he meant to say. He looked at the vendor, a heavy-set man in a yellow apron who was still grumbling. "What's the problem here?" The vendor looked up, clearly prepared to be annoyed, then recalibrated when he registered Carter's suit and his general air of being someone who could cause problems. "These kids tried to walk off with 2 pretzels and a corn dog without paying. I'm trying to explain that I've got a business to run and I can't be feeding every—" "How much?" Carter said. The vendor blinked. What? How much do they owe you? Well, it's about $12, but it's the principal. Carter reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulled out his wallet, and placed a $100 bill on the cart counter without blinking. Keep the change. Give them whatever they want. The vendor went quiet immediately with the particular silence of a man whose principle has been converted to profit. Carter turned back to the boys. All four were staring at him now. Up close, the resemblance was somehow even more unnerving. He had a strange, vertiginous feeling, as if he were standing in front of mirrors that had been slightly warped, familiar reflections, off by only degrees. "What are your names?" he asked. He kept his voice level, the same tone he used in board meetings when he didn't want anyone to see how carefully he was paying attention. The tallest one answered first, with the automatic wariness of a child accustomed to adults who ask questions they shouldn't. "Daniel." "Eli," said the one with the scar. "Marcus." A pause. "Like your driver," the third boy added, glancing at the Escalade with something between suspicion and admiration. The smallest, the one with the grey eyes, hesitated longest. Then, Noah. Daniel, Eli, Marcus, Noah. Carter repeated them internally like a sequence he needed to memorize. "Are you with anyone? A parent? A guardian?" The boys exchanged a look, one of those rapid, wordless communications that groups of children develop when they've spent a lot of time together. Daniel spoke again. "Our aunt. She's getting medicine from the pharmacy." He pointed down the block. "She'll be back." Carter nodded slowly. He should leave. He was going to be late. In less than 6 hours, he was supposed to be standing in the grand ballroom with Vivian on his arm and 300 white orchids around them. Instead, he said, "How old are you?" Daniel considered the question as if checking for traps. 10. Eli's 9. Marcus is 9. Noah just turned 8. 4 boys, between ages 8 and 10. Carter did the math without meaning to. He had been 30 years old 10 years ago, and 10 years ago, before the company had gone public, before the money had become the kind of money that changed how people looked at him, he had been someone slightly different, someone who had loved a woman named Sarah Calloway, enough to promise her things he couldn't keep. He had thought about Sarah exactly twice in 10 years. He thought about her now a third time. "What's your last name?" he asked Daniel. The question came out quiet, careful, like he already suspected the answer would cost him something. Daniel looked at him for a long moment with those unsettlingly familiar eyes. "Ellison," the boy said. "Our last name is Ellison." The word hit Carter like a physical thing. He stood on the sidewalk at the corner of Wacker and Michigan while Chicago moved around him, and something enormous and irreversible shifted inside his chest. Behind him, Marcus the driver was leaning against the Escalade, trying to look like he hadn't heard anything. Down the block, a woman was walking toward them from the pharmacy, a paper bag in her arms, moving quickly the way people move when they've left children alone longer than they intended. Carter turned to look at her, and the past 10 years collapsed like a building with its foundation cut clean through. She hadn't changed the way he expected her to. Carter had built a version of Sarah Calloway in his memory over the years, softened her edges, smoothed out the details the way time does to things we try not to think about. In his recollection, she was suspended somewhere between who she had been at 26 and who he imagined she might have become. He had never allowed himself to follow that thought to its conclusion. The woman walking toward him now was 36 years old, and she was real in a way his memory had failed to account for. Her dark hair was pulled back practically, not stylishly. She wore a grey coat that had been good quality once, maybe 3 winters ago. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of chronic exhaustion rather than a bad night, the kind of tiredness that settles into a person so gradually they stop noticing it. She was still beautiful. That part his memory had gotten right. But it was a harder beauty now, sharpened by years that had clearly not been gentle. She saw the boys first. Her pace quickened with the automatic relief of a woman confirming that her children are exactly where she left them, intact and unharmed. Then her gaze shifted to the tall man in the charcoal suit standing among them, and she stopped walking as if the sidewalk had tilted beneath her feet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city filled the silence around them. A cab horn, someone laughing on a phone 2 storefronts away, the distant percussion of a construction drill. "Sarah," Carter said. It came out more quietly than he intended. She recovered faster than he did. She always had. "Carter." Her voice was even, which told him the evenness was costing her something. She crossed the remaining distance to the boys and put a hand on Noah's shoulder, with the instinctive protectiveness of a woman who had been the only wall between her children and the world for a very long time. "What are you doing here?" "I was passing. My car stopped. I saw the boys." He paused. "I saw them, Sarah." She understood what he meant. He watched her understand it, watched something move through her expression that she controlled before it could become visible. "We should go," she said. She looked at Daniel. "Thank the man and let's go." "He already paid for our food," Eli said helpfully. "Then thank him for that, Sarah." Carter took one step forward, not threatening, not demanding, just present. "Their last name is Ellison." She went very still. "Daniel told me," Carter said, "and I'm looking at them. I'm standing here looking at all 4 of them, and I'm telling you, I'm not walking away from this corner without understanding what I'm looking at." The boys were watching both adults with the particular attention children pay to conversations they're not supposed to understand and understand completely. Sarah glanced at them, made a quick calculation, and looked back at Carter with eyes that were no longer carefully blank, but quietly exhausted in a way that suggested she had been carrying this specific weight for a very long time. "Not here," she said. "Not in front of them." Carter nodded once. He looked at Marcus, his driver, who had the professional discretion to be studying something fascinating on his phone. "Marcus, can you take the boys to get something warm to eat? There's a diner on the next block." He looked at Daniel, the oldest, the one with the guarded eyes. "Is that okay with you?" Daniel evaluated him with a solemnity that belonged on someone 30 years older. Then he looked at Sarah, who gave the smallest nod. "Fine," Daniel said, "but we're not going far." 200 feet, Carter said. "You can see the door from here." He watched Marcus shepherd the 4 boys toward the diner, Noah glancing back twice with those grey eyes, before Carter turned back to Sarah. They were alone on the sidewalk now in the relative sense, surrounded by strangers who paid them no attention. "How long have you been in Chicago?" he asked. 8 months. She shifted the pharmacy bag in her arms. "We moved from Cincinnati. And before Cincinnati? Columbus. And before that, Pittsburgh." A pause. "We move when we need to." Carter absorbed this without responding immediately. He thought about 4 boys in worn sneakers, navigating cities, sharing backpacks that had seen too many seasons. He thought about Sarah with shadows under her eyes that had nothing to do with last night. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, something older than both. "Tell you," she repeated. And in those 2 words was an entire archive of history that Carter could feel the shape of without yet knowing the contents. "Carter, when the boys were born, when I found out what was happening, you were already gone." "I wasn't gone. We ended things, but I wasn't unreachable." "You were unreachable," she said, with a quiet firmness that didn't invite argument. "Not physically, but you had already decided what your life was going to be. The company was everything. I watched you choose it 1 month at a time until there was nothing left to choose between." She shifted her weight. "When I found out about the pregnancies, I was 26 years old and terrified and alone, and I made a decision. To keep them from me. To protect them," she said. The distinction was not subtle. "I didn't know who you were going to become. I knew who you were then, and the man you were then. Brilliant, driven, completely consumed by building something. That man was not ready to be a father to 1 child, let alone 4. Carter wanted to argue. He found, standing on that sidewalk, that he could not entirely form the counter-argument, because she wasn't wrong about who he had been at 28. She was possibly still not wrong about who he was now. He had, after all, chosen to spend this particular morning preparing to get engaged to a woman he respected but did not love. in service of a merger that would benefit his company. "They don't know about me," he said. "They know their father wasn't around. I've never told them more than that." "And the name? Ellison?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was slightly rougher. "I couldn't take that from them. Whatever else, they deserve to carry that much of you." She looked away down the street toward the diner, where through the window Carter could see Marcus sitting with 4 dark-haired boys at a corner booth. "Noah has your eyes. I noticed the day he was born. I've been noticing every day since." Carter followed her gaze. Through the diner window, Noah was showing Marcus something. A drawing, it looked like, on a folded piece of paper. Marcus was nodding with the exaggerated approval of a man determined to be a good audience. Something was happening inside Carter's chest that he didn't have clean language for. It felt structural, like load-bearing walls shifting. "What does he need?" Carter asked. "What do they need? Medical? School?" "Carter, I'm not asking to write a check and disappear. I'm asking because I'm trying to understand what their life looks like." He paused. "The pharmacy bag, is someone sick?" Sarah's expression flickered, just briefly, just enough. "Noah has asthma. It's manageable, but the medication is expensive, and my insurance situation recently—" She stopped herself. "It's being handled." "Is it?" She raised her chin. "I have managed everything for 8 years, Carter. I don't need you to swoop in and rescue anyone." "I know you don't need me to," he said. "That's not what I'm offering." He was quiet for a moment, choosing words with more care than he usually bothered with. "I'm offering to be responsible for something I should have been responsible for a long time ago." Sarah studied him the way she always had, thoroughly, without sentimentality. It was one of the things he had once loved about her. She never looked at him and saw only the version of himself he was trying to project. "You have somewhere to be today," she said. It wasn't a question. She was looking at his jacket, his watch, the careful grooming of a man prepared for a significant occasion. "I do," he said. "Then go." "Sarah." "Go," she said more gently. "This conversation isn't going anywhere in the next 10 minutes. Go do what you have to do." She finally looked at him directly, fully, without the guard she'd been maintaining. "But Carter, if you walk away from this corner and decide it's easier to forget what you saw today, then stay gone. My boys don't need a man who is almost ready to choose them." He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the weight of the $200,000 ring in his jacket pocket suddenly unbearable. Then his phone rang. Vivian's name on the screen, calling to confirm he was on his way. He stared at it for 3 full seconds. Carter stared at Vivian's name on the screen for those 3 seconds, then pressed decline. It was the first time in 2 years of dating that he had declined her call. He wasn't sure she would even recognize the tone. He put the phone back in his pocket and looked at Sarah, who had watched him do it with an expression that revealed nothing. "I'm not going to the engagement party," he said. Sarah blinked. Whatever she had been prepared for him to say, it wasn't that. "Carter, I'm not asking for anything from you right now. I'm not asking you to trust me or forgive me or change anything about your life." He spoke carefully, the way he spoke when he had made a decision that was irreversible, and he needed the other person to understand that he understood its weight. "I'm telling you that I just declined a call from the woman I was supposed to get engaged to in 5 hours, and I need you to know that it wasn't an impulsive thing. It's the clearest decision I've made in years." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. A cab splashed through a puddle near the curb and neither of them moved. "You don't know them," she finally said. "You met them 7 minutes ago." "I know." He looked through the diner window again. Daniel was talking to Marcus now, gesturing with both hands about something, and Marcus was leaning forward with his elbows on the table, genuinely engaged. Eli had taken out a small notebook and was drawing something. Noah was still working on the folded paper, with the focused intensity of a child for whom the work was serious. "But I know what I saw when I looked at them, and I know what I felt." "What did you feel?" He turned back to her. "Like I had been living in the wrong direction for a very long time, and I'd just been handed a compass." Sarah pressed her lips together. He could see her fighting something, the part of her that wanted to believe him doing battle with the part of her that had spent 8 years learning not to. "One conversation on a sidewalk doesn't make you a father," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But it's where it starts." She looked at him for a long time. Then she exhaled, not a sigh of surrender, but the particular breath of a woman making a practical calculation. "The boys will be finished eating soon," she said, "and Noah needs his medication. Let me drive you home." "Absolutely not. Sarah, it's 30 degrees, and I can see from here that Noah isn't wearing a heavy enough coat." She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked toward the diner with an expression that suggested she was annoyed at him for being right about the coat. "One ride," she said. "That's all." The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Pilsen that had good bones and insufficient heat. Carter noticed the way Sarah moved through the space, efficiently, without apology, the way people move through homes they are making the best of, rather than choosing. The living room had 4 sleeping bags rolled neatly against one wall, 4 backpacks on hooks by the door, each labeled with a name in black marker. A whiteboard on the kitchen wall covered in a weekly schedule written in Sarah's handwriting, school pickup times, homework blocks, meal slots, Noah's medication reminders marked in red. The boys came in behind them and immediately dispersed with the practiced choreography of a household that had systems. Daniel went to the whiteboard and checked something. Eli dropped his backpack and pulled out a textbook. Marcus, the younger Marcus, to differentiate from the driver, went to the kitchen and started filling a glass of water without being asked. Noah sat on the couch, pulled his knees to his chest, and watched Carter with steady grey eyes. "You draw?" Carter asked him, nodding at the folded paper Noah was still carrying. Noah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes." "Can I see?" Another pause. Then Noah unfolded the paper and held it out. Carter crossed the room and took it carefully. It was a pencil drawing of 4 figures standing together, rendered with the kind of instinctive spatial understanding that most children don't have. The proportions were careful. The details were specific. Daniel's guarded posture, Eli's scar, Marcus's sideways grin, and in the center of the 4 figures was a 5th shape, roughly adult-sized that hadn't been fully drawn yet. Just an outline, a placeholder. Carter looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing to the unfinished figure. Noah looked at the drawing, then up at Carter, with the directness that children have before the world teaches them to be indirect. "I don't know yet," he said. "I was still deciding." Carter folded the drawing carefully and handed it back. He stayed for 2 hours. He hadn't planned to stay for 2 hours. Sarah made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table while the boys moved around them, occasionally drifting into the kitchen for snacks or to ask Sarah questions about homework. Carter noticed the way each boy interacted with her differently, Daniel with a careful protectiveness, as if he had appointed himself co-guardian, Eli with cheerful irreverence, Marcus the younger with affectionate teasing, Noah with quiet closeness, staying near her without being asked. He noticed what was missing too. The furniture was sparse. The refrigerator, when Marcus opened it looking for juice, had a careful, calculated arrangement that spoke of a budget managed with precision. The boys' clothes were clean and well-maintained, but limited. Noah's inhaler was the only medication on the counter. No backup, Carter noticed. 1 canister. He said nothing about any of it directly. What he did instead, while Sarah refilled their coffee, was take out his phone and send 3 messages. 1 to Diane, instructing her to cancel all his afternoon commitments. 1 to his lawyer, brief and unambiguous, and 1 to Vivian, the hardest to write and the most necessary. He kept it short. He told her the truth, that he couldn't do it, that he was sorry, that she deserved someone whose whole heart was in the room and that his wasn't and hadn't been for longer than he'd admitted to himself. He pressed send before Sarah came back with the coffee because he didn't want to do it with her watching. It felt like something that belonged to him alone, that particular closing of a door. When she sat back down, she looked at him with the attentiveness she'd always had. "You're quiet, thinking. About the fact that I have 4 sons I've never met," he said, "who share my last name, and one of them has my eyes, and one of them draws the way I used to draw when I was young, And I've been in this apartment for 90 minutes, and I already know more about who they are than I know about most people I've spent years with. Sarah wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Carter, what is it that you actually want here? Because I need you to say it plainly. The boys can't survive a version of this where you appear, disrupt everything, and then decide it's too complicated. I want to be their father, he said, simply, without theatre. I want to do it properly with your guidance at whatever pace you decide is appropriate. I want to learn what they need and provide it, not as charity, not as guilt money, but as a father. He paused. And I want to understand what happened between us well enough to make sure I never repeat those same mistakes. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Outside, a siren passed somewhere on the street. One of the boys laughed at something in the other room, Marcus's laugh big and unguarded. You understand, this doesn't fix anything overnight, she said. I know. The boys will have questions, hard ones, ones I can't answer for you. I know that too. And I am not... She stopped, chose her words carefully. I am not the same person I was at 26. This isn't a reunion, Carter. If you're here for them, you're here for them, not for some version of what we were. He nodded. Understood. She looked at him across the kitchen table for a long, assessing moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the beginning of a willingness to believe that the thing in front of her was real. Okay, she said quietly. At that exact moment, Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Carter with those careful 10-year-old eyes, evaluating, calculating. Are you coming back? He asked. Carter looked at him steadily. Yes. Daniel considered this. Then, tomorrow. Carter felt something in his chest break open in the best possible way. Tomorrow, he said. First thing. Daniel gave a single nod, the nod of someone who had decided, provisionally, to extend trust on a trial basis, and disappeared back into the other room. Carter looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Carter. And somewhere between them, something that had been frozen for 10 years began, very slowly, to thaw. But Carter had no way of knowing that by morning everything would be different again, because someone else had found out where Sarah and the boys were living, and that someone had reasons, urgent and dangerous, to make sure Carter never came back. Carter was at his penthouse at 7 in the morning when Diane called. He had not slept. He had sat in the living room of his 42nd floor apartment with a glass of water he never drank, looking at the city, rearranging 10 years of his own life in his mind the way you rearrange furniture in a room you've decided to finally live in properly. At some point around 3 in the morning, he had taken the engagement ring from his jacket pocket and set it on the kitchen counter, and looking at it there, expensive and cold and entirely disconnected from anything he actually felt, had confirmed what he already knew. He had done the right thing. Then Diane called. Mr. Ellison, I'm sorry to call early, but I've been contacted by someone named Richard Hartley. Carter straightened. Richard Hartley was Vivian's father. He was also 71 years old, owned a commercial real estate empire worth roughly $2 billion, and had a reputation for responding to professional setbacks the way other men responded to physical threats. What did he say? Carter asked. He didn't speak to me directly. His attorney called. Diane paused with the discomfort of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. They're threatening to pull the Hartley Group's investment from the Meridian Tower project. That's the anchor deal for the whole downtown development portfolio, sir. Without it, 3 other investors will likely follow. We're talking about potential losses in the range of... I know what we're talking about, Carter said. There's something else. Another pause. The attorney mentioned that Mr. Hartley has engaged a private firm, investigators. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, that he intends to find whatever leverage is necessary to encourage you to reconsider your decision. Carter was quiet for a moment. Leverage. In his world, that word had a specific meaning. It meant information. It meant vulnerability. It meant, and here his mind arrived at the thought with cold clarity, a woman living in a 3rd-floor apartment in Pilsen with 4 boys and a single inhaler on the kitchen counter. He set down his glass. Diane, Clear everything today. It's already clear, sir. You cancelled yesterday. I mean everything for the foreseeable future. Postpone the Vancouver meeting. Reschedule the Hong Kong call. Whatever is on the calendar for the next 2 weeks, it moves. A pause. All of it? All of it. He was already moving toward the bedroom for his coat. And Diane. Get me Thomas Greer. Thomas Greer was his attorney. The best one. The kind of attorney that other attorneys found quietly intimidating. Tell him I need him at my office in an hour. Tell him it involves a family matter and a potential hostile action from the Hartley Group, and that I need both situations handled simultaneously. Yes, sir. Another pause, and then, with the warmth of a woman who had worked for him for 9 years and therefore felt entitled to the observation, Mr. Ellison, are you all right? Carter picked up the engagement ring from the kitchen counter, held it for a moment, and put it in a drawer. I'm better than I've been in years, he said. I'll explain when this is over. He went to Sarah's apartment before he went to his office. He told himself it was to warn her, and it was, but it was also because he had told Daniel he would be there first thing. And Carter Ellison, whatever else he was or wasn't, kept his word in matters that counted. Sarah opened the door in a grey sweater, coffee in hand, with the alert eyes of a woman who had been up for some time. Behind her, the apartment was already in motion. Daniel making toast, Eli doing something with a textbook, Marcus the younger trying to balance a spoon on his nose, Noah watching Carter arrive with those grey eyes and saying nothing. You came, Sarah said. There was something careful in her voice that he understood was not quite surprise and not quite relief, but something adjacent to both. I said I would. He stepped inside, and the 4 boys oriented toward him with varying degrees of subtlety. I need to tell you something. He explained it quickly and plainly, the way he delivered bad news in boardrooms, without softening it to the point of distortion, but without drama either. Richard Hartley, the investigators, the word leverage. Sarah's expression moved through several things in quick succession. Then it settled into something calm and a little hard. He recognized it as the expression of a woman who had dealt with difficult situations alone for long enough that the arrival of a difficult situation no longer panicked her. It only made her methodical. What does that mean for the boys? She asked. It means I want you to let me move you somewhere safer while this gets resolved temporarily. He held up a hand before she could speak. Not because you can't handle it, because I can, and because I should, and because I am not going to let my past professional decisions create risk for children who've already had a hard enough time. Sarah looked at him. You've known about them for less than 24 hours. I know. He looked toward the kitchen, where Noah had abandoned all pretense of disinterest and was watching openly. But they're mine, Sarah. They've been mine for 8 years, whether I knew it or not. I'm not going to negotiate about protecting them. The silence that followed was not a resistant silence. It was the silence of a woman recalibrating. Where? She finally asked. I have a house in Lake Geneva. It's quiet. It's staffed. It has 4 bedrooms. A pause. And a yard. I don't know if that matters. From the kitchen, Marcus the younger's voice. Does it have a TV? Marcus, Sarah said. It has a TV, Carter confirmed. Several. Thomas Greer handled Richard Hartley in the way that good attorneys handle men who mistake aggression for leverage, methodically and with documentation. Carter authorized the release of a full financial disclosure to 3 independent board members, removing any ambiguity about his personal decision to end the engagement being connected to the Meridian Tower deal. He also made clear, through Greer, that any investigative activity directed at Sarah or the boys would be met with legal action swift enough to make the Hartley Group's real estate problems look minor by comparison. Richard Hartley was a man who respected force. When he encountered it clearly applied and without blinking, he recalculated. By Wednesday, the threat had dissolved. The Meridian Tower investment was restructured with a different anchor partner, one Carter had been cultivating for 2 years, and who was, if anything, a more reliable long-term bet. The 3 dependent investors followed, as Carter had known they would, because money followed stability, and Carter understood stability better than Richard Hartley ever had. None of that was the hard part. The hard part was a Saturday morning in Lake Geneva, 3 weeks later, when Carter sat at the kitchen table helping Eli with a math problem, and Daniel came in from outside with mud on his shoes and announced, with the suspicious nonchalance of someone who had been working up to something, "Sarah said you're our dad." The kitchen went very quiet. Carter put down the pencil. He looked at Daniel, then at Eli beside him, then at Marcus, the younger, who had appeared in the doorway with a glass of juice, and at Noah, who was sitting on the counter, still in his pajamas, watching. "Yes," Carter said. "I am." Daniel processed this with his characteristic solemnity. "Why weren't you around?" It was the question Carter had been preparing for, and simultaneously knew no preparation was adequate for. He answered it honestly, not completely, because some of the complete answer belonged to years they didn't yet have the context for, but honestly. He had made choices that put other things first. He hadn't known about them, and he should have. He was sorry. He intended to spend a significant portion of the rest of his life making different choices. Daniel listened to all of this without interrupting. Then he said, "Okay," and went to wash the mud off his shoes. Eli leaned over and looked at the math problem again. "Can we finish this?" Carter picked up the pencil. "Yeah," he said, "we can finish this." From across the kitchen, Noah slid off the counter, padded over in his socks, and sat down in the chair next to Carter without saying anything. He pulled his folded drawing from his pajama pocket, he seemed to carry it everywhere, and smoothed it on the table. He picked up a spare pencil, and slowly, carefully, with the focused seriousness that he brought to everything, he began to draw in the outline of the fifth figure, the one he hadn't been ready to finish before. Carter watched him work without speaking. When Noah was done, he turned the paper so Carter could see it. The figure in the center was no longer an outline. It had a face now, a strong jaw, wide-set eyes. It looked exactly like Carter. Noah looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes that were mirrors of Carter's own, and said, with the simple directness of a child who has decided something important, "I knew it was you. I just needed to make sure you were going to stay." Carter looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at this boy, his boy, and felt something complete itself inside him that he hadn't known was unfinished. "I'm staying," he said, and this time there was nothing uncertain about it at all. Across the table, Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway with her coffee, watching her 4 sons and the man who had missed 8 years and was determined not to miss another day. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some things, when they finally fall into place, don't require commentary. They only require you to stay in the room and let them be real.